So thank you very much. As Mary said, my name is Mike Farquhar. I'm a consultant sleep physician. Thank you so much to dotMD for asking me to come back again. I spoke at last year's conference. I told a story last year about why I became a doctor. What I'm going to talk about today is about sleep and sleep medicine. I'm not actually going to talk too much about the stuff about shiftwork and fatigue. A lot of that was covered this morning, and we might come back to that later on in the questions and answers. What I'm going to talk about today is why I think you should know about sleep more than anything else. As doctors, as healthcare professionals, we don't talk to you very much about sleep. In the UK, where I know the data, medical students get about 10 minutes of teaching about sleep during their undergraduate curriculum. You spend a third of your lives asleep. I think it is quite important that you do have some kind of understanding and awareness of it. So what I'm going to do is try and tell you a bit about the weird and wonderful of sleep, a bit about the very basics of sleep, and then why I think it matters to you as dotMD conference goers in particular to know a bit about it. But, because it's dotMD and we like stories, I'm going to start with the story of how I became a sleep doctor as opposed to how I became a doctor. And that starts with sleep. So when I was about 16, I'd kind of cracked the whole sleeping thing. I was able to sleep through the night. Parents quite happy with that. Sleep was a good thing. And that's fine. And, so by that point, everything was fine. Went off to sleep each night. Everything is okay, hunky-dory. And then when I was about 16, things started to change a little bit. I started to have this sensation, this experience of waking up in the night, feeling like I couldn't move, feeling absolutely terrified, heart pounding, pressure on my chest, a tight band around my chest, felt like I couldn't breathe. These ghostly images kind of vaguely out of sight in the room, and this sense that I was under threat in some way. It is quite a terrifying experience to have happen to you. Hands up if it's happened to you, just out of interest. Yeah, most people will have it happen maybe once or twice in their lives. Happened to me a lot more than that. First time I thought, right, it was just a bad dream, whatever. And it kept happening. And I thought, right, something is not right here. There's something not right about how I'm sleeping. So I took myself off to my GP, rural Highlands of Scotland, and said, this is what's happening. And my rural Highlands Scotland GP, who had 10 minutes of teaching about sleep, if that, said, I have no idea what you are talking about. I don't think you're dying. I don't think it's a seizure. Please leave. I'd also just told him I was gay, which he also had no idea how to process. So it was like, please just get out of my waiting room now. This is too much to deal with. So I did what hopefully any self-respecting 16-year-old do and decided I would go and find out about this myself. Now, this is the early 90s. No Google. If you want to find out about stuff, you have to do a bit of hard work in terms of research. So I started going to the library and looking it up. And what I started to find was something that really fascinated me. I definitely wasn't the only person to have had this experience. And as I started to read up about it, I discovered that as you looked across time, across cultures, almost every society, every culture has a story about a demon that comes and attacks people in their sleep at nighttime. And you can go through different cultures, different places, time and space. This is the Greek, the black dream that comes and terrifies you in your sleep. Al-Jathum in Islamic culture comes if you haven't been keeping up with your regular prayers and gets you in your sleep and tries to persuade you to do it. In Japanese culture, this kind of idea of a demon that comes and binds you with metal in the night to stop you being able to breathe. Every culture, if you look at them, there are these kind of ideas of demons and things that come in the night. One of the things I love about sleep is that it is a shared experience. We all sleep. We all know what sleep is. But actually so much of it, what is normal about sleep, is filtered through different societies and different cultures and what they bring to it. And as I started reading about it, I started to get really interested in the stories of sleep and the science underlying it. And after a while, I realized that I wasn't dying and it was all fine and I didn't have to worry about me. But I started to get really interested in sleep. If you did see my talk last year, you will know that along with becoming a doctor, it was also around about the time that I started thinking about being a doctor, and I was slightly younger than this, that I started to really get into comics. And Ian's already made the point really brilliantly of how well comics can be used to tell stories and how we can use that to do that. Around about this time, a guy called Neil Gaiman was starting to write a comic book series called The Sandman. The Sandman is brilliant. If you want a great comic series to really get you into why comics are a brilliant form of literature, The Sandman's a great place to start. It is an extended epic about the god of dreams, Morpheus. It's a very personal tragedy about him and what happens to him and his family, all the rest of it. But woven into it, Neil Gaiman is somebody who loves the whole idea of stories and storytelling. And woven into this story over 75 issues of comics is lots of stuff about the different way that different societies and different cultures think about sleep and some of the weird things that go on. So the two things together, this kind of very personal interest in my own research and reading the comics at the same time, gave me this interest in sleep that then has followed me all the way through my career. What I think sleep is a missing bit of the jigsaw puzzle. You are all, I think, majority healthcare professionals. You all spend a lot of time thinking about how you can get the most for your patients and a bit about how to get most out of you. But we don't think about sleep and how we can use sleep to try and improve the outcomes that we get for ourselves and our patients. And what I think sleep is the foundation of every aspect of your physical and mental health. We should be talking a lot more about it. With a little bit of knowledge about sleep, you can start to understand both some of the weird and wonderful, which I'll come on to in a second, but also to begin to how to use things a bit better for yourself. To somebody like me, I'd spend a lot of time looking at diagrams like this. This is something called the Hypno Gram, and this is the stage representation of sleep through the night. Sleep is not quite as simple as you go to bed, close your eyes, you switch off for 8-9 hours, hopefully, and then wake up the next day. There's a lot more going on in the night when we sleep than a lot of people appreciate. Down the left-hand side of this diagram are the different stages of sleep. So there are different types of sleep that we cycle through each night. So you can be awake, which hopefully most of you are, but we're going to come on to a little problem with that in 2 seconds. REM, rapid eye movement sleep, is what we normally call dream sleep. It's when most of you will have the narrative-type dreams that if you talk about dreaming, this is what you will mean. You can actually dream in any sleep stage, but the narrative-type dreams come in REM sleep. 1 and 2 are what we call light sleep, quite easy to be woken up from. Stage 3 is deep sleep, very difficult to be woken up from. Different types of sleep have different functions, different purposes. You need all of the bits of sleep working together to get all of the benefits of sleep. We'll come on to that. But different bits of sleep do different bits preferentially. As we go through the night, we cycle through those stages in a fairly predictable fashion. As adults, you will have sleep cycles that last about 90 minutes on average. So every 90 minutes, you go through a fairly regular pattern of falling through wake into light sleep, into deep sleep, back through light sleep, and then you dream. We actually usually briefly wake up at the end of each cycle and go back to sleep. You're not usually aware of that. And that cycle repeats. And as we go through the night, the pattern changes. So we tend to get most of the deep sleep that we're going to get towards the beginning of the night, and most of the light and dream sleep that we're going to get towards the end of the night. Even just that basic understanding of sleep, once you've got this in your head, you can actually start to piece together some of the weird and wonderful that we'll come on to in a second, including sleep paralysis. There's a lot of individual variation. Hands up if you're a morning person. Hands up if you're an evening person. Hands up if you're neither. Yeah, so there are some people that are neither. Most people know. And that's because one of the other things that affects wake and sleep is you all have an internal switch, if you like, a body clock drive, your circadian rhythm that is hopefully telling you to be awake in the daytime and asleep at nighttime. It's one of the most powerful drives there is in your body. If you're lucky enough to go on holiday to the other side of the world and get jet lagged, most people feel a bit out of sorts for a few days until your body clock realigns to time and wherever you've gone. It's also why, so the work about shift work, if you ask somebody to work at night, biologically, that is completely unnatural. Your body is telling you should be asleep. We're expecting you to deliver high-quality medical care. But there's a lot of variation around about this, and some of that is, in fact, most of that is genetic. Circadian rhythm is a little bit more complicated. The more you are awake, the more you need to be asleep, fairly straightforward. What is a little bit trickier is that your brain is trying to compensate for that through the day, and your brain is sending a strong alerting signal through the day to keep you awake. At the beginning of the day, you're not too sleepy, hopefully, don't need a very strong signal. At this time of the day, your sleep pressure has built up, but your circadian alerting signal hasn't quite caught up yet. So most of you will be feeling a postprandial little bit of sleepiness just now, which I am not going to take personally, is all due to your physiology and not because I'm rubbish at talking to you. Your alerting signal catches up as the day goes on. And actually, in the evening, most of us are most alert. And it's very difficult to force yourself to go to sleep before your bedtime because that alerting signal is still high. It's only as that drops off that you get off to sleep towards the end of the night. But the more that you understand about the basics of sleep, even what seems weird and wonderful can be put into some kind of sense. A lot of what is unusual about sleep or seems unusual about sleep is to do with transitions. When I explain this to families in clinic, when I'm talking about some of the things that go wrong with kids' sleep, I talk to them about driving a car and making gear shift changes. Every time you transition between a different stage of sleep, it's like making a gear shift change in a car. And I'm sure it's never happened to anyone in the audience, but every now and then, some people, when they're making gear shift changes, will make a mistake. They get stuck between gears, and it takes a few seconds to sort that out and get it fixed again. And that happens to all of us as we sleep. These transitions are usually smooth, but because there's lots of them going on, every now and then, there's just a mistake. Kids' brains, brilliant things, phenomenally chaotic, and when they're sleeping at night, they haven't quite got that smooth pattern of sleep yet. So kids are actually a bit more vulnerable to transition problems in sleep, which is why kids tend to have a few more of some of the problems that we're going to talk about. Some of them are really basic. Have you ever been falling asleep, either yourself or even worse, the person lying next to you suddenly gives a random punch or kick and wakes up? As we transition into sleep, one of the things that's changing is your sensorium, your brain is settling into sleep mode. And it's kind of shifting from that active searching out around the world, taking in information, into a more settled form. So you're still taking in information when you sleep, but it's a bit different. Your sensorium and everything about it is settling into a different mode. And as you transition between wake and sleep, there's that kind of vulnerable in-between point. And hypnic jerks, sleep myoclonus, annoying kicks, whatever you want to call them, are just one of those things that we tend to get as we transition into sleep, that kind of random motor spasm as we go off to sleep. If it's bad enough, it can wake you back up. Some people get the sensation of falling with that, which most people find a little bit uncomfortable, but can be quite pleasurable. But hands up if you had that happen to you. Yeah, that one's pretty common. Most people have done that. That's a transition problem. It's all to do with the sensorium and how that's changing. At the most extreme end of that problem, people, as they fall off to sleep, can get a sensation of not motor, but sensory change. They get the sensation they've got a huge pressure building up inside their head. They get this feeling as if the world has exploded. They'll see a big light explosion, big noise that they'll hear. They just kind of wake up, oh, what the hell happened? Turn to the person next to them, and they go, I don't know what you're talking about, nothing happened. And it's the same thing as the hypnic jerk. It's just your brain transitioning between being awake and being asleep, and it plays tricks in that in-between time. This is a completely benign phenomenon. Very scary when it happens to you, but if you can give people adequate reassurance and explanation, usually people are able to be calmed down. And then we tell them that in our wisdom, the name that we have given to this is exploding head syndrome, which then usually undoes all the work that you've just done in trying to tell them that it's quite benign and don't worry about it. But, that's doctors for you. I'm a pediatrician. One of the most common problems that we see in children's sleep is something called a sleep terror. Hands up if you're a parent. Hands up if your child's ever had a sleep terror. So sleep terror is this absolutely terrifying thing, hence the name, where children who look like they're sound asleep will suddenly sit bolt upright in their cot or their bed. They will be very pale, their hearts will be racing, they will be shouting, they'll be screaming, they'll be going, help, stop, mum, dad. They'll run around in circles, you talk to them, they don't talk back to you, you pick them up, they hit you put them down, they just go blah, 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 like this. And the parents are going, what the hell is happening to my child? This is not normal, what is going on? It's very common. So hands up again if you'd seen this happen. Were you freaked out by it? Yeah, and the kids in the morning, they don't remember this. It's gone away. They don't have any recollection at all. But sleep terrors can be absolutely terrifying. In the olden days, what was used to be done with these kids is they were rushed down to the equivalent of their rural GP, who did a rapid exorcism and tried to get rid of the problem, because the assumption was that these children had been possessed by demons. What's actually happening, I think, is even more interesting, but it's probably a little bit more mundane than demons. What's happening with these kids at this point is they are transitioning from deep sleep towards a wake point, and their brain just has got it a bit wrong. They've made a gear shift change mistake, and they've got stuck between being deeply asleep and awake at the same time. When that happens, you end up with a state that's kind of superimposed between the two, and the brain starts to panic a bit. It's going, I have no idea what's happening, I am very confused. And when you're at toddler age, a confused brain basically has a very small repertoire of things that it can do. If you confuse a toddler and make them think they're under threat or frightened, they start shouting, Mum, Dad, stop, help. They run around, they get ready to, it's like a fight or flight type response. And that's exactly what's happening. It's the physiology, it's just a confused brain panicking a bit. It takes about 15 to 20 minutes on average, but the brain eventually works out it's made a mistake, shifts the gears back again, the child goes back to sleep usually, and meanwhile the parent's heart rate is now going 10 to whatever, and they have to reach for the gin or the bottle of wine at 3 in the morning to try and reassure themselves it's okay. As you get a bit older, the same phenomenon, the brain gets a bit more sophisticated. Instead of panicking, when the same thing happens, the brain acts like a teenage boy and basically goes, I have no idea what's happening, act cool. And what it does is it starts to get you to do things that you do in automatic pilot without thinking. And that's sleepwalking. When we sleepwalk, we do things that we're able to do without thinking about in the daytime. So people who sleepwalk tend to go to the toilet and pee in funny places, or they run up and down stairs. One of my adult colleagues has a 65-year-old woman who goes on her motorbike in her sleepwalking, which is slightly problematic, and she now locks the keys in a safe, so she doesn't do that. But sleepwalking is the same phenomenon. And again, when you explain all this to parents, it's one of my favorite consultations, because actually, when you talk families through this, you can see them chilling and de-stressing around about it. Sleep paralysis is something very similar. So sleep paralysis, so this is a medieval representation of sleep paralysis, so you can see the nightmare lurking in the background there. This is the idea of incubus and succubus, demons that would come in the night and associated with that feeling. Again, sleep paralysis is a transition problem, but the transition here is not between deep sleep and wake, it's between dream sleep and wake. And we tend to see this as a problem either right at the beginning of sleep or right at the end of sleep. Dream sleep is a fascinating stage of sleep, of life in general. It's a bit like an organized psychosis. We all go a little bit nuts in our sleep every night, and we'll come on to reasons for that in a little while. But it's a very chaotic kind of stage in that right. Your dreams, your brain, when we look at the activity of your brain in dream sleep, it looks very much like wake. And from your brain's perspective, if you are dreaming that you are running a marathon or dancing on the stage somewhere or climbing Everest or fighting pirates, on one level, your brain believes that's true. And if your brain thinks you're fighting pirates, it thinks your body should be moving to do the same thing, which is a problem. If you were Zog the caveman back in the Stone Age and you think you're fighting whatever, and you waltz out of your cave sound asleep, you get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger, there are no more Zogs, and the human race dies out. So to protect ourselves, we evolved a mechanism that paralyzes us during dream sleep. Every single night of your life, you are paralyzed every time you dream. And that's something that many people are not aware of. We cut the tone to our muscles as we dream to stop us acting out our dreams. And all sleep paralysis is the brain transitioning too quickly between dream, sleep, and wake, so you get that superimposition of states. You're more awake than you are asleep this time, which is different to sleep terrors and sleepwalking. But that sleep paralysis still persists. And that's what gives that feeling of being able to move. The constriction, the pressure comes because most people, if they get a bit of a fright, they can't move. You try and take a big breath in. Your diaphragm is still working absolutely fine. Your involuntary muscles are not paralyzed. But because to take a big breath in, you have to use your accessory muscles, which are paralyzed. You can't do that. And your brain, which doesn't understand exactly what's going on, comes up with a reason why you can't do that. So your brain imagines that there is a constricting presence that's stopping you from being able to breathe, which is why we get that feeling of constriction or pressure as part of sleep paralysis. What often goes along with sleep paralysis is something that makes the whole experience even more fun when it comes to being terrified at 3 in the morning or wherever it's happening, which is something called hypnagogic hallucinations. This is exactly the same idea. It's the persistence of dream imagery into the waking state. It often goes along with sleep paralysis, but it's often very intense. It's usually something pretty frightening. It's usually something pretty scary. You feel like something awful is happening. And it's where that idea of demons came from. In the Middle Ages and historic times, you saw weird things happening in the night and you felt like you were under threat. It was a demon. These days, I think a lot of alien abduction stories are probably sleep paralysis and hypnagogic hallucination events, because these days we think about demons an awful lot less, but we think about aliens a lot more. So aliens come into the story as what's going on through the night. I think, I'm not going to make a too sweeping a claim, I think a lot of religious visitations are probably also explained by sleep phenomena and all the rest of it. Maybe not all of them, I don't know. But certainly some of them, I think, are. But that's where that's coming from. People who get sleep paralysis and hypnagogics also have this, which makes it even more fun, this kind of feeling of nested dreams. It's a bit like Inception. Inception came out as a film, and I went, yes, this is something else that explains my sleep. Brilliant. Nested dreams are exactly as it sounds. You think you're having a dream, and you wake up, but then you're still in a dream, and then you wake up, and you're still in a dream. Now, if you imagine you're doing that with a sleep paralysis hypnagogic hallucination event, my record so far is 15 of these in a row before I eventually wake up going, oh, God, please let this now be over. But that actually can make this even more terrifying. It's difficult when you're an adult. Imagine being a child having something like this going on and being able to think about that and explain it in a way that somebody's going to be able to understand what's going on. But usually you can peel it back and work out what's all going on with that. Are there weird and wonderful things in sleep? Lots of people make noises in sleep, sorry. Most people talk in their sleep. It's usually fairly common, fairly benign. It can be quite funny if you actually listen to what people are saying, record it, let them hear it the next day, go, who were you talking about? Some people snore, and at the more extreme end, that can be problems with obstructive sleep apnea, relatively easily treated. At the extreme end of this, there's one of my favorite random sleep disorders, which is a thing called cataphrenia. Cataphrenia has this horrible, really loud groans as you take breaths in through the night. Occurs during dream sleep. We still don't really understand why. Unfortunately, it's quite difficult to treat. It's very disruptive. It basically sounds like the noise you think Chewbacca would make when he's having an orgasm, and it goes on all through the night, and it can be, or intermittently all through the night, and it can be really disruptive to people's sleep. So we get these kids referred in going, what is going on? Anyway, so some of the weird and wonderful. So, if that's all going on, why is that happening? Why have we got this fundamentally weird state where we end up in this state of paralyzed psychosis every night? What's the point of sleep? So you're all here, hopefully, because you are these people. And one of the questions that we get chucked at us quite a lot is, you don't really understand sleep, do you? Nobody understands what it's for. Now, my whole career is predicated on that not being true, so I disagree with that. I don't think we know all the answers about sleep by any stretch of the imagination. And one of the brilliant things about being a sleep doctor is we're still learning lots of brilliant things about sleep. At its most basic, this is what sleep is. Your brain and body are quite a complex bit of kit, and just like a car, if you don't do the regular maintenance, sooner or later, something is going to start going wrong. And with sleep, that is exactly what is happening each night of your life. Now, I've forgotten it. I did this the last time I did a version of this talk in Ireland. So in the UK, this is called the MOT. Is it NCT in Ireland? So it's that kind of regular maintenance check for your car to make sure it's all working. Sleep is doing this for you every night of your life. And if you neglect sleep for a little while, you're probably all right. But the more you neglect sleep, the more the problems start to creep in, and it begins to affect every aspect of your functioning. The data that I've seen from Australia, Marilyn can correct me, suggests that our flu season this year is going to be fairly awful. So the flu vaccine campaigns will probably be starting in all your places of work fairly soon. If you are sleep deprived on the day you get your flu vaccination, and we measure your vaccine responses 10 days later, they will be 50% that of somebody who'd had a decent night's sleep the night they got the vaccination. They'll eventually get there, but it will take longer for the vaccine to work. If you're exposed to the common cold virus when you are sleep deprived, you're probably about 3 times more likely to become symptomatic than if you have had a decent night's sleep. Your immune system depends on sleep. If you are unwell, so if you're not seriously unwell, you've got a cold, a virus, whatever, it's a natural response to take to your bed and get a bit more sleep to try and recover it. So your immune system depends on sleep. It's very difficult to say this without sounding like I'm making a bad joke. Obesity is a big problem that's growing, and we don't really know what to do about it. Sleep is one of the things that affects obesity. If you are sleep deprived, your body thinks you're under threat. It adjusts the pattern of secretion of leptin and ghrelin, the hormones that regulate your appetite and hunger, makes you hungrier. It makes you crave food that gives you quick energy, so cake and chocolate and crisps, and it makes it feel like it takes longer before you feel full. The more sleep deprived you are, the more of a problem that is. The more sleep deprived you are, the more likely you are to gain weight, the more likely you are to become obese. So we are increasingly looking at improving people's sleep as one of the ways that we can try and tackle obesity, particularly in children. Some of the functions of sleep sound a bit wacky. This is a relatively new discovery from about 7 or 8 years ago. When you sleep at night, the spaces between your neurons widen, and that literally allows the flushing out of toxins and metabolites that have built up during the daytime. That sounds a bit weird, but actually we can demonstrate that with even a single night's sleep deprivation, your brain will accumulate beta amyloid. Beta amyloid is one of the proteins that's implicated in Alzheimer's disease. So again, sleep deprivation is a risk factor for conditions like Alzheimer's. And the more that we understand about sleep and its relation to illness, the more that we understand that almost any physical or mental health problem is more likely to happen if you are even mildly sleep deprived. So risks of things like high blood pressure, strokes, heart attacks, some types of cancers, obesity, type 2 diabetes, Alzheimer's, anxiety, depression, they all rise if you are not getting the right amount of sleep. Hands up if you got a decent night's sleep last night. Well done. Hands up if you didn't. So the bad news, I'm afraid, is your ability to take in everything you've been taught today is limited. Your brain has a finite capacity to take in new knowledge each day, just like your email. So NHS IT came up this morning. I have to regularly empty my email to be able to actually make the thing work. If you don't empty your deleted items folder, you can't take in new information. Sleep does that for you every night as well. You haven't had a decent night's sleep, you don't take in information very well. If you don't get a good night's sleep tonight, you will not retain that information. And tests of simple factual knowledge, if you haven't had a good night's sleep, you will score about 30% less well on average than people who get a decent night's sleep after they've learned whatever it is they've learned. You can also do some quite complex learning in sleep. Playing her music, I don't know where she's gone, if this ever happened to her, but we know that people continue to learn things in sleep that they've been doing in the daytime. So things like children learning to ride a bike, they go to bed, they haven't quite cracked it, they wake up the next day, off they go. It's because their brain continues to rehearse and learn that procedure in sleep itself. So sleep is absolutely essential for learning. And then dream. Dream is the bit of sleep we really don't understand as well. We don't understand quite a lot about it, but not as much as we would like to. What's so special about dream sleep? Why do we do this paralyzed psychosis thing every night? During dream sleep, one of the things that's happening is your brain is free associating. It's taking everything you've ever done, ever learned, ever experienced, and it's throwing it all up into a big jumble. And out of that, we can have new insights, new understandings, new ideas can come as that information juggles around. Kekulé, who discovered the structure of benzene really puzzled organic chemists when they were trying to work it out because it has a completely unique structure, and they just couldn't work it out. He went to sleep, he'd been reading about Greek mythology, he'd been thinking about the structure of benzene, he dreamed of Ouroboros, the demon that eats its own tail, and he woke up with this sudden realization that that was the structure of benzene, it was a circle. His brain had taken these random bits of information, thrown them together, and given him that inspiration and insight. Creative inspiration can come from sleep as well. McCartney said that the lyrics yesterday, the music for yesterday came to him from a dream. The Stones have also said that some of their lyrics came to them in a dream, whether it was sleep or other, but anyway. But creative thought comes from dream and dream sleep as well. Dream sleep also makes you nice people. There's a role of dream in emotional regulation. If you don't get enough sleep, particularly dream sleep, you tend to be irritable, short-tempered, snappy. You're not a nice person to be around, unfortunately. And this is a really important role of dream sleep. When you are sleep-deprived, one of the first things that goes is your sense of empathy. We've already heard this morning how essential empathy is, and we should be thinking about how we make sure that we protect that in people in health services. If you are sleep-deprived, your ability to think clearly becomes impaired. You tend to be much more emotional, you make decisions without really thinking through the consequences, you argue, you do irrational things, you are not somebody who really has anything more than the emotional temperament of a frustrated toddler. And that's important, I think, in people who are doing important jobs. We can tell by looking at the times that Trump tweets, he really doesn't get very much sleep. I'm not saying that's the entire reason for everything about him, but it's probably one of the things that factors in. We know that you lot are probably all sleep deprived. This is data from the UK, but actually when we look at sleep in most adults in developed countries, you are all probably sleep deprived to the tune of about an hour per night. Doesn't sound very much. You should be getting 7 or 8 hours sleep. You're missing an hour. There is coffee. Everything's okay. You can still function. If you're missing an hour of sleep every night of your life, you're missing the equivalent of an entire night's sleep every week of your life. And hopefully I've done a little bit of persuading you that that is something that's going to have consequences. We need to think about sleep as a positive way to prioritize our health. The other thing about that is that because we tend to get most of the light sleep and the dream sleep towards the end of the night, if you are chronically sleep deprived, what you are preferentially missing out on is the bits of sleep that are really important for, not really important things like learning and memory and being able to function in the daytime and having nice emotions and being regulated and all the rest of it. So when you are chronically sleep deprived to that degree, that's the bit of sleep that you're missing out. It means that one of the things is that sleep is essential. If we are going to be kind and empathic and able to do things, we have to be protecting the ability of people who work in jobs like ours to make sure that they are not sleep deprived and fatigued. And so that's a big focus. So it's the work that Caroline was alluding to this morning that we've been looking at over time. But taking it back to even more basics than that, sleep is, I think, an absolutely universal human experience, but it's also an experience that is different depending on where it is viewed from. Each night, sleep helps us recreate the person that we are. It helps us to be the best version of the person that we want to be. And we should be thinking about how we protect and emphasize that as much as we could. We've forgotten that, 10 minutes of teaching about undergraduate medicine on sleep. But it's not something that is rocket science. The title of the talk comes from Macbeth, so that description of sleep as the death of each day's life. It's the last thing we do each day before we're starting the next day. But the rest of that passage in talking about sleep, Shakespeare knew it. Sleep that knits up the raveled sleeve of care. Everything that's been worried and stressed about you, sleep will help to deal with that. Sleep that is sore labour's bath, balm of heart minds, great nature's second course, chief nourisher in life's feast. Shakespeare's brilliant. He's always got a quote for absolutely everything. But this is it. That's sleep. It is, if it was a drug, it would be the most popular drug on the planet in terms of doing it. But we ignore it so much. What most people find is if they prioritize sleep, that they definitely feel a difference. So given that I hadn't rehearsed this, I'm actually quite proud that I've got to the end with 10 seconds to go. So thank you.